Ineffective Assessments in Education, Providing an Awareness for School Counselors by Kathleen Randall. The abstract focuses on high-stakes exams and their ineffectiveness in education using the No Child Left Behind Act. Assessments are dismantling our democratic foundation of education in the U.S. Recommendations to improve assessments will be presented. What do you think of when you hear the word education? Will be discussed assessments using the NCLB, America's Political Foundation of Education, and the types of research used, which was qualitative and quantitative. When thinking about education, we often think of knowledge, information, academic, scholarly ideas, schools, trainings, intelligence, problem solving, moral citizenry, learning, growth, and development. Contrary to these beliefs, when thinking of education, we all must think of assessments. A Nation at Risk was a report which began blaming schools for the economic recession of the early 1980s, which caused not by schools but by the policies of the Federal Reserve Board and by multinational corporations exporting jobs to low-wage countries. The report called for tougher academic standards, high-stakes testing, and accountability for students, teachers, and schools. It also called for higher standards in and thereby greater scrutiny of teacher preparation, credentialing, and evaluation. The passage of Goals 2000 Educate America Act in March of 1994 heralded a new role for the federal government in support for education. No longer would the federal role focus only on narrow technical programs, but it would promote a comprehensive approach to help all students academically. NCLB of 2001 is a United States Act of Congress concerning the education of public schools. NCLB supports standard-based education reform, which is based on the belief that setting high standards and establishing measurable goals can improve individual outcomes in education. Since enactment, Congress has increased funding from $42.2 billion in 2001 to $54.4 billion in 2007. Funding tied to NCLB received 40.4% increase. The funding for reading quadrupled from $286 million in 2001 to $1.2 billion. If schools' results are repeatedly poor, then steps are taken to improve the school. Schools that miss the AYP, which is the adequate yearly progress, for a second consecutive year are publicly labeled as being in need of improvement and are required to develop a 2-year improvement plan for the subject that the school is not teaching well. Students are given the option to transfer to a better school within the school district, if any exists. Missing AYP in the 3rd year focuses the school to offer free tutoring and other supplemental educational services to struggling students. If a school misses its AYP target for a 4th consecutive year, the school is labeled as requiring corrective action, which might involve wholesale replacement of staff, introduction of new curriculum, or extending the amount of time students spend in class. After a 5th year of failure results in planning to restructure the entire school, the plan is implemented if the school fails to hit the AYP targets for the 6th year in a row. Common options including closing the school, turning the school into a charter school, hiring a private company to run the school, or asking the State Office of Education to run the school directly. Who is being left behind? Researchers report that elementary students experience high levels of anxiety, concern, and angst about high-stakes testing. Triplett and Barksdale investigated students' perceptions of testing. They concluded that elementary students were anxious and angry about aspects of testing culture, including the length of tests, extending testing periods, and not being able to talk for long periods of time. The research also reports that student anxiety increases when teachers are apprehensive about the exams. When the students are drilled every day about testing procedures and consequences, the fear of failure prevails. Teachers are also being left behind, and also their perceptions is that they're not against accountability, but rather they view assessments as distinct from high-stakes testing. Teachers posit that an overemphasis of testing results in an unbalanced curriculum and inappropriate instructional decisions. Teachers suggest that excessive pressure is labeled on the particular grade levels. Teachers are having second thoughts about pursuing and remaining in education. Teachers propose that test results should not be used to make high-stakes decisions, as well as They have observed that test emphasis affects students negatively, and it manifests in physical, psychological, or emotional symptoms. Schools as well are being left behind due to the lack of funding based on high-stakes testing results. How can schools do better when funding is based solely on test scores? Secondary education students feel that assessments are not connected to the curriculum and offer no incentive to do well. ELLs are also being left behind due to the complexity of exams. Schools in these particular states cannot report their scores, so in turn have lower test scores, which cause them to lose their funding. Democracy in public schools. Political effects of NCLB. The old idea of education stems from Thomas Jefferson, who believed that public schools would play an indispensable role in the newly created U.S. Republic by educating the populace and, more important, the leadership to become competent, active, and engaged participants in an American democracy. The state should assume responsibility for supporting and governing public schools that would equip the American people for responsible citizenship, provide the knowledge needed for national economic development and prosperity, and instill moral and ethical values in American children and youth. Ineffective assessments of NCLB has affected students of low socioeconomic status and race in negative ways in regards to tracking, sorting, and labeling students. Standardized testing allows for these instances to take place and give administrations the numbers that allow for this type of practice to take place. Ineffective assessments. Josh Schnur and Joshua Weiner state that too many of our students at every achievement level are being shortchanged. Based solely on their race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status, there are students at the high, middle, and low levels of achievement who are not receiving the educational challenges that they need in order to succeed and excel. Program for International Student Assessment PISA results and other analysis show that we have performance gaps for our students at all levels of achievement relative to their peers internationally. According to the 2009 PISA results, the U.S. ranked 14th in reading, 25th in math, and 17th in science among the 34 Organizational for Economic Cooperation and Development countries. Once we look at this particular data, we see that U.S. students perform well below the standard of readiness and for college and or careers regardless of where they fall on the achievement continuum. In the 4th and 8th grades, our nation's highest 10% of students made much smaller gains in both reading and math than our lowest, achieving 10%. Recommendations include policymakers, assessment experts, and local school administrators should begin an intensive dialogue about preparation for side effects of high-stakes testing. Schools need to be monitored to make sure that large portions of the established curriculum are not thrown out, as well as test preparation. State personnel, educational associations, and local educators should work together to convey to the media and local communities the limitations of high-stakes testing as a single indicator of school and student success. Summary and conclusion. We need an education system that pushes to the development of all youth. This comprehensive approach should offer the best chance to improve outcomes for every student. For our talented 10th students languishing grade levels behind, we need a system that rewards the very best students, sets clear goals, measures progress toward these goals, gives educators information they can use to improve student outcomes, and demands dramatic action in the face of persistent failure. Here are my references that are used.